Mesa Verde. Mention those two words, you may get a lot of different responses from different people. Some of them would say that's where the cliff dwellings are located. And people lived there for hundreds of years and then they suddenly disappeared. Part of that is true. The Mesa Verde is the largest collection of cliff dwellings in the United States. Located on the Colorado Plateau, the Four Corners area of the U.S. When the first ancestral Pueblo people arrived around 500 A.D., they must have found this mesa area very hospitable to them because they stayed and developed skills over the generations in agriculture and engineering and construction, and also in the idea of communal living tied to permanent buildings. The diets of the early arriving peoples were not as good, anywhere near the goodness of the people at the end of the period. They had developed, during the generations, they had developed dry land farming techniques to the point where toward the end they had enough surpluses where they could store it in granaries, which you would find in the recesses of the canyon walls, as a matter of fact. As far as construction, they started out with pit houses. A pit house was simply a dugout of maybe the depth of 3 to 4 feet, maybe a 20-foot circumference circle, slanting walls and a flat roof, kind of an adobe type structure. They went on to build multiple room buildings with residential rooms and also ceremonial kivas, keyhole shaped kiva, and there would be multiple kivas in some of these large, some of these units having more than 50 units, 50 bedrooms. From there they went to the ultimately the multi-story cliff palaces. The one thing in the perceptions that needs to be corrected is that people didn't disappear suddenly or mysteriously. They migrated. Just as the people migrated to get there in 500 AD, they also migrated around 1300 AD because of forces we do not know. It must have been something climatic, you would think, because they had lived through some tough times. There is an excellent discussion of this in a video which is available from the National Park Service website, and the title of it is, it's a 17-minute video. It's called Footprints of Our Fathers. Excellent discussion of where those people, how they went and where they are today. But today what we're going to do is take a look at the video that was shot some 30 years ago. Let's take a look.
The sandstone monolith known as Point Lookout is the first impression visitors have of Mesa Verde National Park, the spectacular archaeological reserve located in the southwest corner of Colorado. The serpentine roadway up this rocky sentinel marks the entrance to a remote world containing a marvelous array of dwellings once occupied by an ancient Pueblo people. Today, with the guidance of National Park Service naturalists, visitors can marvel at the craftsmanship of these early inhabitants, commonly known as the Anasazi, or Ancient Ones. From the valley below, it appears that the mesa tops are relatively flat with only sparse vegetation. In fact, many mesa tops, particularly the higher mesas located near the north end of the park, contain lush valleys supporting a wide variety of vegetation. This is a semi-arid region, averaging less than 20 inches of rain each year. However, winter snows often blanket the higher elevations, and summertime thunderstorms bring timely additional rainfall. During periods of plentiful moisture, a spectacular display of wildflowers brightens the landscape. Mention the words Mesa Verde, and the picture of cliff dwellings immediately comes to mind. The fact is, the cliff dwellings that are so often associated with the people of this time and place were only built during the last 100 years or so of the estimated 1,000 years that the Anasazi occupied this land. Use this visit to Mesa Verde to learn more about what is known about these people and what can only be theorized about their day-to-day existence.
We see the same thing at Spruce Treehouse, where we have bands of yellow stucco and red stucco with white.
One of the earliest types of structures found in Mesa Verde is the pit house. Some 1,500 years ago, the early nomadic way of life gave way to a new dependence on agriculture. This new stability led to the construction of these shallow excavations with an above-ground portion supported by 4 upright posts, as shown in this reconstructed exhibit. During the next several hundred years, the form of housing units evolved into a series of above-ground rooms with vertical walls of mortared stone blocks. The earlier excavated areas of the pit houses might have been retained in later structures as the circular or keyhole-shaped areas known as kivas. From the simple pit houses to the complex multifamily structures that had evolved by sometime around the 12th century AD, dwelling units at Mesa Verde were found almost exclusively on mesa tops. Begin your tour of Mesa Verde at the Far View Visitor Center, located 15 miles from the entrance station. Literature and exhibits are available. As you look out over the landscape, you'll begin to develop a feeling for this land of gentle green mesas, separated by steep, rocky canyons, which the Anasazi called their home. The first hike will begin from the Far View complex of Mesa Top ruins located just a mile down the main park road from the Far View Visitor Center. A half-mile loop trail will lead from the namesake Far View House to a number of unique structures in this once densely populated area. The circular stone structure called Mummy Lake is the focal point of 2 widely differing theories by archaeologists. Some think this was a reservoir fed by man-made channels. Others hold that its size is too large for the small amount of precipitation that occurs here. They believe that it was used as a large ceremonial gathering place. A short distance beyond Mummy Lake, the National Park Service has erected a shelter above the remains of a puzzling structure known as Megalith House. At the far end of the structure, a series of large stones were deliberately placed at the base of a wall in an upright fashion at an area removed from the ceremonial kiva. The reason that these large stones, or megaliths, were placed in this manner may never be determined. Were they ceremonial, or did they serve some unknown structural function? It's just one more piece in the puzzle that is all that remains of this complex ancient culture. Return to Mummy Lake and the quarter-mile portion of the loop trail that leads to Coyote Village, a large one-story structure containing over 30 rooms. The single course of masonry suggests that this village was probably built around the year 1000 AD. The main features of the village are the closely spaced small rooms, the 5 keyhole-shaped kivas, and a circular tower located just beyond the 5 kivas. The path now leads back to Far View House, one of the few structures that is stabilized so that visitors can walk on the walls. Artifacts recovered from the site and structural style suggest that this large 2-story structure was probably occupied as late as the year 1300. The most accessible and most visited large cliff dwelling in Mesa Verde is Spruce Treehouse. This magnificent site is reached via a 1/2 mile round-trip hike with a vertical change of 170 feet. The trail begins just to the right of the museum, which is the center of visitor activities on Chapin Mesa. Most of the elevation change occurs in the short, steep switchbacks located at the start of the trail that lead toward the bottom of the canyon. As the trail levels out, look around for the remains of small, hard-to-reach man-made storage structures located high in the cliff walls above. At the head of the box canyon, in a grove of trees thriving in the moisture from a spring which was utilized by the occupants of Spruce Treehouse, the trail turns and heads up toward the ruins located just ahead. One of the first things to notice upon arriving at Spruce Treehouse is the complexity of the architecture. Within this small space, more than 100 rooms were laid out on at least 3 levels. The site includes 8 kivas, including one which can be entered via a ladder, just as the Anasazi must have entered it hundreds of years ago. Construction details, such as the T-shaped doorways and specific openings for heating and ventilating, are clearly visible throughout the structure. Hikers exit the site via a set of stone stairs that lead back down to the bottom of the canyon. The bottom of the canyon is marked by a small bridge over the spring-fed stream. From this point, the trail heads back up to the trailhead at the museum. Mesa Verde National Park is an archaeological site that happens to be located in a region of incredible natural beauty. However, this beauty hides a fragile treasure of information about a distant civilization that must be protected. The mesa tops and rocky canyons of Mesa Verde contain hundreds of unexcavated ruins. Hiking is limited to a few specific trails because of the many fragile ruins located throughout the park. One of these trails is the 1.5 mile round trip to the Balcony House and Soda Canyon overlooks. The trail winds along an easy path through fragrant groves of juniper and pinyon pine on its way to the overlooks. The trail is not steep, but there are a few uneven sections over rocky steps to make wheelchair access impossible. The trail leads to an overlook of Balcony House located beneath an overhang in the wall on the opposite side of Soda Canyon. A short loop portion of the trail leads to another overlook over Soda Canyon located just a few hundred yards away. This section of the trail is somewhat rockier, but the view up the entire length of Soda Canyon is well worth the small added effort. Once you reach the end of the loop portion of the trail, return to the trailhead via the same route. Now that you've seen Balcony House from across the canyon, it's time to meet the ranger who will lead the tour through this exciting site.
If you have a fear of heights or a fear of closed places, this is the place to conquer those fears.
After a quick descent down a short path and a steep set of stairs, the ranger briefs visitors on the history behind this unique cliff dwelling. The tour starts in earnest as each member of the group climbs the 32-foot ladder that leads up to Balcony House. Actual entry into the structure is through a narrow passageway between the mortared wall of the dwelling and the smooth face of the canyon wall. The group assembles on the area known as the North Plaza. A low, sturdy wall forms the balcony that separates visitors from the 700-foot drop to the canyon floor below. The group heads up a short ladder and through a short, dark tunnel and into an area containing 2 large kivas. There is no wall at the edge of this plaza to separate the space from the canyon below. Since the kivas were once covered with flat roofs, it is unlikely that small children were allowed in this portion of the dwelling. After exiting the structure, the only adventure left is to climb up another ladder and across a rock face that has been shaped into a number of small footholds. The view from the top gives a better perspective of the entire exit route, including 2 ladders and a traverse over a bald rock face. It's an exciting end to an informative tour of a magnificent site. For a change of pace and a chance to stretch your legs, return to the museum for the start of the 3-mile round-trip Petroglyph Point Loop Trail. The first section of the trail repeats the start of the trail to Spruce Treehouse, including the initial switchbacks. Soon, a set of stone stairs heading up the side of the canyon wall and a trail sign mark the start of the actual Petroglyph Point Trail. The numbered signs along the trail correspond to the numbers in the trail guide that's available for this self-guiding hike. The trail is not heavily utilized. The only sounds you may hear are the sounds of your own footsteps and the call of a lone canyon wren. As the trail passes through a narrow crack in the rock wall, a precariously balanced boulder hovering above the top of the slot makes the narrow space seem even tighter. Narrow spaces are the norm on this portion of the trail as it passes down a set of stone stairs set into another crack in the canyon wall. All along the trail, the forces that shape these mesas and canyons are clearly visible. Here, the cracks in an underlying layer indicate future separation of this layer. In an alcove above the trail, all that remains of a former structure is a small mortared wall to remind us that this entire region was once inhabited by these relatively unknown ancient pueblos. Finally, at the foot of a tall sandstone cliff, the trail reaches the beautifully preserved petroglyphs that give the trail its name. The identity of the person or persons who etched these figures into this rock wall cannot be known. All we hope is that future study will give us a greater insight to the lives of these early inhabitants. The trail climbs sharply back to the top of the mesa, where another trail sign points the way back to the museum where the hike began. Next, turn from the solitude of the Petroglyph Point Trail to the relatively crowded scene of the tour led by a park naturalist to Cliff Palace. Cliff Palace and the previously visited Balcony House are the only two sites in Mesa Verde that require an advance ticket purchase. Tickets for these two magnificent sites are available only at the Farview Visitor Center. This tour requires passing through narrow spaces and climbing short, steep ladders. However, the spaces are not as narrow, and the ladders are neither as high nor as exposed as those at Balcony House. This tour is easily accessible to anyone capable of even moderate exertion. After a steady downhill trip, the group now proceeds up a short ladder toward a wide ledge where they gather at an overlook to Cliff Palace. Here, the park naturalist begins an introduction to this, the largest cliff dwelling in North America. The tour group, consisting of approximately 60 people, provides a sense of scale for the tremendous size of this magnificent structure. The site, more than 300 feet long, contains 217 rooms, 23 kivas, numerous terraces, and even a 4-story tower. The vast majority of cliff dwellings here at Mesa Verde consist of just single-room storage units and dwellings of less than 5 rooms. One can only wonder at the combination of forces that led to the construction of this very complex structure. Here, at the base of a cliff in a remote corner of Colorado, a unique civilization developed an extremely sophisticated social order that was obviously very successful. The trail out of Cliff Palace is the highlight of the tour for many visitors. A short path and a few stone stairs lead to a narrow crevice which was one of the original access points for the inhabitants of Cliff Palace. Within the confines of this slender opening, hikers can examine hand and toe holds carved out of the rock wall by ancient inhabitants of Cliff Palace. The last few feet to the top of the mesa involves a tight climb up a set of short ladders that are set into the rock crevice. All of the activities described so far have been centered on Chapin Mesa, which is the primary location visited in Mesa Verde. However, there is another, quieter side of Mesa Verde, Wetherill Mesa. The Wetherill Mesa Road branches off the main park road just beyond the Farview Visitor Center. It crosses a broad valley and follows a number of curves across smaller mesa tops on its way to a parking area at the far end of Wetherill Mesa. From the parking area, visitors can board a free tram which leaves every half hour for a short ride that takes them to a number of sites, including Longhouse and the overlook to Kodak House, a large, unexcavated cliff dwelling. While waiting for the tram, hikers can visit Step House via a self-guiding nature trail. This unusual site contains dwellings located next to each other that are from two very distinct periods. As the trail approaches the edge of the canyon, your eye is drawn to the dim outline of the San Juan Mountains located on the distant horizon. The trail follows a set of stairs down the side of the canyon to a short wooden decked bridge. In the distance, beneath the overhanging canyon wall, the tower of Step House rises above the rest of the dwelling. The remains of 4 pit houses are located at the base of the overhanging cliff. The charred posts are all that remain of the support structure of the roof of this pit house. It isn't clear whether this was the result of accidental fires or whether it was a ceremonial burning of the structure when it was abandoned by the occupants. Pit houses are associated with a period dating from about 450 AD to 750 AD, which has been called the Modified Basket Maker period. The 4th pit house has been partially rebuilt as a cutaway to illustrate typical construction techniques employed by these ancient Pueblo people. Directly to the right of the pit houses is a moderately large cliff dwelling known as Step House, which was constructed during the latter classic cliff dwelling period around the 12th or 13th century AD. A short ladder takes hikers to the first plaza level. The rock face at the top of this ladder contains a large collection of petroglyphs inscribed in the sandstone surface by the Anasazi occupants of this dwelling. It is unusual to find structures from such distinct periods of social development located so close to one another. Return to the trailhead by way of the paved loop trail that leads back to the mesa top. The Step House trailhead is adjacent to the loading area for the tram. This free shuttle takes visitors to the trailhead for a brief hike to Longhouse, a site excavated in a joint project by the National Park Service and the National Geographic Society. A short path through a pinyon pine and juniper forest takes visitors to the edge of the mesa top.
Up here, again, on the mesa top, so closer to their mesa top village.
After a brief introduction by the park naturalist, the group heads down a long stairway leading to a serpentine path that takes hikers down to the level of Longhouse. Longhouse is the second largest cliff dwelling in Mesa Verde. A series of ladders leads to the upper levels of the structure. These levels are located at an elevation that corresponds to the deepest recesses of the overhanging cliff. A spring at the back of the cave provided a convenient source of precious water for this site. An estimated 100 to 200 people might have occupied this cliff dwelling at one time. 21 kivas are incorporated into the structure, neatly tucked in between more than 100 small rooms. These small rooms were adequate for individuals whose average adult height was 5 feet 5 inches for males and 5 feet 1 inch for females. An unusual feature of Longhouse was the large rectangular open courtyard found at the front of the dwelling. Why did it exist here and not at other dwellings? What was it used for? Many questions will remain unanswered, including what really happened to the people who once inhabited this place. Were the once fertile mesa tops overpopulated before the inhabitants drifted to the arid lands south of here, beyond the volcanic cone known as Shiprock? These questions may never be answered. However, because of the dedicated efforts of early preservationists and the continuing stewardship of the National Park Service, it is possible to walk the same steps that these early inhabitants once walked and watch the same moon rise over this precious archaeological treasure, Mesa Verde National Park.
If you enjoyed this program, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of the series.